Hello, welcome to our Wednesday devotional. Thank you for joining me today. I have a question for you. Who is the most important person in our church services on Sunday morning? First thought might be the preacher, and I hope that's a pretty important person. But I thought about this. What about the choir singers? What about the song leader? Aren't they important? What about the nursery workers? They're very important. What about the children's church workers? What about the people who greet others as they come into the services? All these people are very, very important, though sometimes they don't get the visibility that the preacher gets. I was reminded of this in a devotional I read recently, I think by Charles Spurgeon. That was from 1 Chronicles chapter 4. Now, 1 Chronicles, if you recall, is a book that lists a lot of names, a lot of chronology and so forth, a lot of names that we don't know much about. In chapter 4, 1 Chronicles chapter 4, there's a list of names, and then following the list is a description of who they are and what they did. 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 23 says, "These were the potters, and those that dwelt among the plants and hedges. There they dwelt with the king for his work." I began to think about that. Here we are, 2,000 years later, and we're reading about these people with these seemingly menial jobs, these tasks that they performed. Who were they? They were the potters. Who were the potters? Of course, the potters worked with clay and with mud. That was a very dirty job, rewarding, I'm sure, but a very dirty job. They were the gardeners, the ones that pulled the weeds from the king's gardens, the ones that plucked off the flowers or plucked out the bad things that were there in the garden and made it look nice. They were the ones that tended the hedges, the hedge trimmers, if you will. These people were all a part of the king's life and ministry. They were mentioned even in Scripture. I think it's very significant because there are 2 or 3 things about them that are mentioned that I think are significant with regard to our ministry. In our ministry are many, many people who do a lot of things voluntarily. They work around the buildings. They work in the buildings. They clean the buildings. They clean the bathrooms. They pass out tracts away from the church building. They invite people to church. They perform the music. They practice behind the scenes and all these things. They're sort of like the potters and the gardeners and the hedge trimmers. I noticed 2 things in 1 Chronicles 4:23 that are very significant about these behind-the-scene people. The first thing I see there in verse 23 is that they were living near the king. They were indispensable, so the king provided housing for them. Perhaps these were in outlying buildings around the palace. I'm not exactly sure. Or maybe they were in houses that were along the walls of the palace. Whatever it was, they were important enough that the king wanted them nearby so they could do that work. I tell you what, as a pastor, I want people nearby who can do the work of this ministry. What a blessing it is to have so many people involved. Some of them are like the potters or like the gardeners or like the hedge trimmers that are not very public in their ministry, but very, very valuable. And this verse also says, 1 Chronicles 4:23, that they were doing the king's work. They weren't doing their own work. The gardener wasn't trimming the gardens so he would look good. He was trimming the gardens and trimming the hedges so that the king would look good. The palace would look good. For whom was the potter working? He was probably making pottery for that pottery which would crack and need to be replaced in the king's palace or on the pathways going up to the king's palace. All of these things were done for the king. Do you get the connection here? We're working for the king. You're not working for the pastor. Even for the church when you serve, you're working for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's not just making good appearances, but sometimes the jobs are dirty. Sometimes we have to get our hands dirty, as it were. Sometimes we have to do things that nobody else knows about, nobody even sees except God. But what a joy it is to know that we're near the palace, and we're doing the King's work. I want to encourage you today that whatever you're doing, wherever God leads you, whatever he leads you to do, remember, we're doing it for the King. Have a wonderful, King-blessed day. God bless you.